Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to have you join us for today's webinar on 2026 Global Enforcement Trends with Anna Hinojosa, facilitated by Sarah Scott and sponsored by Oritain. Gemma Lynch, Oritain's Chief Customer Officer, is unable to join us today. I'm your host, Audrey Clark, Trade and Transportation Specialist with the American Apparel and Footwear Association, and I'll be guiding us through today's session. First, a quick overview of AAFA. The American Apparel and Footwear Association is the national trade association representing apparel, footwear, and other sewn products companies and their suppliers which compete in the global market. Representing more than 1,100 world-famous name brands, AFA is the trusted public policy and political voice of the apparel and footwear industry. Its management and shareholders, its more than 3.6 million U.S. workers, and its contribution of more than $523 billion in annual U.S. retail sales. AFA drives progress on three key priorities: brand protection, supply chain and sourcing, and trade logistics and manufacturing. AFA approaches this work through the lens of purpose-driven leadership in a manner that supports each member's ability to build and sustain inclusive and diverse cultures, meet and advance ESG goals, and draw upon the latest technology. If you encounter any technical issues during today's webinar, please contact Zoom support. For your convenience, we're recording this webinar, and we will make the recording available on AFA's Learning Center within 1 to 3 business days. We value your insights and questions, so feel free to share them throughout today's presentation using the Q&A box found in your Zoom toolbar. We'll address all questions through our dedicated Q&A segment at the end. I'm thrilled to introduce our expert speaker, Anna Hinojosa, Executive Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs with Oritain. Anna joined Oritain as an advisor in June 2022. Prior to this, she was Executive Director at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, where she was responsible for directing CBP's trade threat assessment units, special investigations, and enforcement programs focused on detecting, deterring, and disrupting illicit trade, with a special emphasis on forced labor violations, evasion of special tariff cases, and modernizing the use of civil penalties to ensure appropriate consequence delivery for non-compliance. Anna has had an illustrious career with over 34 years of experience in law enforcement, international trade, international policy development, and started setting in standard setting, both with the U.S. federal government and with the World Customs Organization in Brussels, Belgium. And joining Anna to facilitate this discussion on 2026 global enforcement trends is Sarah Scott, Chief Marketing Officer with Oritain. Today, they'll be discussing how enforcement direction is changing across regions, why routing, transshipments, and component sourcing are drawing attention from regulators, about the role of technology in enforcement actions and how brands can leverage it for compliance. Now I'm pleased to hand things over to Anna and Sarah to begin today's discussion.
Thank you, Audrey, and welcome everyone. I am absolutely delighted to be standing in here for Gemma Lynch today. She does give her apologies. Unfortunately, she was in a skiing accident over the weekend. She has assured us that she'll be back in full force next week, for those of you who are attending the summit. So today we will step in and do her proud and jump straight in. So I'm going to kick things off by giving a little bit of an insight into Oritain. We are global leaders in providing forensic origin verification. We use science, technology, and services to independently verify where products and raw materials come from. This ultimately helps us to protect brand integrity, support compliance, and strengthen supply chain trust and transparency. So Anna, I am very excited to be having today's conversation with you. Lots happening in the world at the moment, very timely, I think, with some of the recent announcements. So we are going to jump straight in. So let's think about 2025. 2025 was a difficult year for importers with tariffs and a lot of uncertainty. And of course, with the recent Supreme Court ruling on tariffs just in the last few days, it's perhaps even more topical. What can we expect to see in 2026?
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Well, I think everybody still has tariffs on the mind. We saw the Supreme Court decision, and hopefully everybody has been able to take a look at the most recent CSMS message posted by CBP, which provides the necessary guidance on what to do with regards to the ending and collection of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act duties. That is posted on CBP's website, so please look for that. It'll give you clearer guidance on what to expect with regards to that. I do think that 2026 will continue to be a year of tariff surprises and tariff changes. So let's hang on to our hat. I do think it's important to note that although the Supreme Court has rendered a decision with regards to the IEEPA tariffs, that doesn't have any impact on the 232 tariffs or the 301 tariffs. So those remain in place, and previously I think have been certified as valid. So I don't foresee changes on that from any kind of court decision. I think interestingly as well is we are a little over 3 years in to the implementation of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. We've seen a growth in enforcement actions, and then what appeared to be for a lot of people in the private sector, and certainly for civil society, what had appeared to be less of a little bit of a decline in enforcement actions. I know a number of colleagues have commented to me about, does it look like CBP is no longer enforcing UFLPA? And my answer is always, that is absolutely not the case. Obviously, CBP and DHS as a whole have had quite a bit of things on their plate, and I think we'll continue to see ebbs and flows of enforcement based on the available resources. We will see, I think, some of the companies have already started to see an increase in the examinations with regards to the focus of country of origin declarations and valuation statements. Many companies are also starting to see the resurgence of CF-28s, the requests for information, or CF-29s without a 28 even, where the government has reviewed the information and made a decision. And so importers are having to react to those with a lot less advance notice. We are also seeing, as we all are glued to the news with regards to where the USTR is headed and what decisions they're making with regards to free trade agreements. The topic of forced labor and forced labor enforcement, even when I was with the government, was probably the number one bipartisan topic. And so it's a topic that will continue to gain more prominence, certainly in the US, but also internationally, as the US has taken that kind of mandate and that flag across the world. And several, if not all, of the recent free trade agreements that have been negotiated between the US and other countries contain one or more provisions related to forced labor. And so we'll continue to see more and more countries taking on a more proactive role for enforcement. And so those of you who have already done all that you can to be compliant with forced labor laws, you're ahead of the game. Those of you who have just started, better ramp up quickly, because enforcement's coming not just from the US. Certainly, we see some innovation coming forward, attempts to get greater transparency by the US government through the digital product passport, and more work going on in that regard. The EU looks like they're finally going to get going on the deforestation regulation. More to come on that. I do think that we are seeing, certainly at Oritain, we've expanded the commodity coverage and areas that we can support clients on to include timber, and we're supporting the UK government on that as well. So more and more we'll see more activity in the area of compliance with regards to deforestation. Last year, there was a law called the Buy American Cotton Act. Certainly, those of you who have heard me speak before, you know I'm a big proponent of U.S. cotton and all those cotton farmers, especially those in Texas, that are near and dear to my heart. But I apologize. But so that law didn't quite make it through. But we did see, for example, some mention in the U.S.-Bangladesh agreement where there might be some provisions for some duty-free status, perhaps on some goods that contain U.S. cotton as part of those products coming in. So we're waiting for greater clarification from the government as to what provisions are going to be enabled to provide those benefits. And certainly there's been the Manifest Modernization Act, which brings about more requirements for everyone. So I'll stop there because I can talk forever. So let me let you ask another question,
Yeah,
Sarah.
wow, goodness. A lot happening, Anna, I think, is kind of the key takeaway from that. So you've obviously spent a huge part of your career working in government sectors. We heard from Audrey over 3 decades. So a lot of wealth of knowledge and insight there. How has enforcement changed in recent years? And are governments doing anything different from what they used to do?
Well, I think the world has changed for all of us, right? So Audrey was kind enough to say more than 3 decades in the government, but you tack on the almost 5 years that I've been retired. It's closely approximating 4 decades in the industry, and thinking about from even right before I retired. I am very grateful and happy that my colleagues at CBP have access to a lot better solutions than even what I had available when I was there. AI, of course, is something that is helping everyone, the private sector and the government. I think supply chain transparency and transaction transparency is really important. I think that in the private sector, companies don't realize just how much access the government has with regards to information. And it's super important. I'll talk a little bit more, hopefully, in the next question on some of the enforcement actions that we're seeing. But a lot of that may be accidental. It just may be not understanding the full breadth of reach that the government has. And I think that we'll see that the governments are more connected, and they are also more connected to the different stages of transportation. So whether it's transportation, departure information from exporting countries, transit information through transit countries, and arrival information changes, et cetera. I think all of that are data that is available to the government that helps the government from a citizen's perspective. I want my government to have as much information as they can to ensure that the goods that are making it into my market are compliant. But from an importing perspective, you may not want the government having as much information that maybe enables them to be super good at enforcement. But I think what we're seeing is a lot of these trade deals, which will, as more information comes out, will give good benefits to the countries that have signed those benefits, but it will also offer opportunities for countries that are not part of those agreements to fraudulently try to take advantage of them. So we'll see more enforcement in that area. A long-standing issue of transshipment will continue to be part of what this government and future governments will see. How transshipment is identified and prosecuted or consequences imposed has certainly been refined. And I think that we'll see more and more public releases with regards to enforcement actions in that regard. USMCA is a little bit up in the air. I came in before NAFTA, and so I had partial to Mexico, US, and Canada agreements. I think reviews are good. Hopefully, everybody will end up with a win-win on this one. But I do think that the region works better as a unit, and so I'm looking forward to see what the results of that review will be. I hope I answered your question, Sarah.
You did. Yeah, look, thank you. Look, let's pick up on something you kind of briefly touched on before. We are also hearing about an increase in cases under the False Claims Act. Could you just give us a bit of color around what is FCA and why do you think we're seeing an increase, a dramatic increase, in fact?
Yeah, I think for people who have not heard of the False Claims Act or its application in recent years, it sounds like it's something new. like it's a new law, when in fact, the False Claims Act was actually enacted in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln. Now, maybe Abraham Lincoln doesn't mean a lot to you, Sarah, but in the US, Abraham Lincoln is big. And he put that in place to ensure that, that civilians could file claims against fraudsters on behalf of the government. And the incentive is that if somebody files a case on behalf of the government, whatever the government gets out of the claim, that citizen that filed a claim can reap anywhere from 20 to 30% of the penalties that the government collects on that. So I think it ebbs and flows on how many citizens decide they want to take on suing on behalf of the government. But certainly in the recent years, we've really seen a lot more whistleblowers willing to come forward and file cases. And in fact, I think when you look at in 2024, for example, two of the cases, there were two cases with less than $20 million in penalties. And in 2025, there were 6 cases with penalties exceeding $100 million. I mean, so the potential wins are there, but also, when in one particular case, there was a $54 million settlement, and the whistleblower received 9.75 million US dollars. It's important to note that the common violations for under this False Claims Act are usually country of origin errors or intentional misstatements. This is extra relevant as we're talking about how free trade agreements can offer benefits, and some less than scrupulous importers may decide that the benefit of not having to pay the higher tariffs are worth the risk. And so maybe falsely claiming the country of origin to gain that benefit is really added to the risk that importers might have with regards to intentional misstatements with regards to the origin of goods. Misclassification to avoid 301 tariffs is another one that's often seen. And then, of course, failure to properly mark goods. That's not to say that these are the only provisions that the government has to take action. I think most of the folks on the line or on this webinar are very familiar with 19 USC 1592, which are the general fraud provisions for negligence, gross negligence, or fraud. And those have been traditionally very common, but that's not to say that these are not growing. More and more allegations are being filed by whistleblowers. And I was speaking to a different audience earlier last week, and I attributed some of the whistleblowing to competitors. And in fact, I was rightfully informed that in many cases, it's not even competitors, it's disgruntled employees or employees who are disappointed with how their company is cheating the government, and they will become whistleblowers also in an effort to potentially gain some of the benefit of the penalties. And also there is still a criminal provision until under 18 USC 1001, which is a criminal provision for false statements. And I'll stop there because I've rattled on a little bit longer on this question.
No, look, thank you, Anna. Very interesting. I think one thing we can both agree on is that Abraham Lincoln had great foresight. So great to be talking about the role of origin and the connection with that today. So let's kind of switch things up a little bit and talk about what tools enforcement agencies are using to identify non-compliance.
Yeah, I think when I was with the government, I was able, over the course of the decades that I was with the government, I was really able to see some exponential growth in the amount of data that the government had access to be able to use as part of its risk assessment and cargo selectivity criteria. But more and more, there's a lot more open source data. There's a lot more use of artificial intelligence and transparency into all of the different supply chains has become much more kind of a minimum standard of being able to do enforcement work. So aside from the government, certainly the US government, but obviously other governments are able to use artificial intelligence and data analytics to identify trends or shifts in trend. I remember when I was still there, there was a relatively new anti-dumping duty case filed on mattresses from China. And it was a really high anti-dumping duty rate, something like, I don't know, really, really high in the hundreds of percentages for those mattresses. And then the year after that anti-dumping duty was issued, all of a sudden, no more mattresses came from China. And then, well, where did they go? What happened? Did they stop exporting? Suddenly, another country that never imported or never exported mattresses started exporting mattresses to the US. And it happened to be a country that didn't actually have an anti-dumping duty against it. These are the kinds of anomalies that the US government certainly has access to, to be able to catch, identify, and make some triangulations on what could possibly be happening there. I think it's not a secret that CBP in particular has relied on a robust lab network within its own organization. And so CBP has 7 labs across the country. They can do all kinds of tariff chemistry and all kinds of other testing that can enable them to verify claims or disprove claims. On many different products, they certainly also have isotopic and forensic origin verification capability in their labs. And that means that they can, on their own, test products that are coming in and determine whether or not they're compliant with the origin declarations, including under a UFLPA or forced labor provision or anti-dumping provision or any other claim that involves origin at the raw material level. I think also it's important to note that the EU is also looking at using isotopic testing, and they are, in fact, already doing some of that isotopic testing as it relates to timber. And we would see them look at more use of that technology for other enforcement capabilities. Certainly anti-dumping and countervailing duty evasion in the past, those have been very, I'm gonna call it documentary supply chain verifications, but with the use of forensic testing for origin, that may open up some new capabilities for the US government or other governments to take enforcement action, having some objective evidence that the goods that are coming forward being claimed as something that isn't covered by an anti-dumping or countervailing duty is in fact subject to those anti-dumping or countervailing duties. I'm gonna stop there. I think that in the past, yes, as I wrap up this question, in the past, many folks were used to receiving a questionnaire from the government and simply answering that. I think it's important to note that the governments are getting much more sophisticated as well, and having a way of being able to provide objective evidence that supports your claims is the biggest insurance policy you can have.
Yeah, wonderful. Look, it's clear that it's come a long way, and great to see that sophistication coming in for sure. We're going to look ahead now. So looking at 2026, what is your advice for companies facing increased enforcement?
Well, I think that AFA members are already ahead of the game. Obviously, it's an industry that has been regulated in so many different ways that most of the importers or industry participants are a little bit more sophisticated, and already the fact that they are involved with AAFA means that they already have access to many regulatory updates on a regular basis, and that's a really important piece. And with the association also being keenly aware of what the industry practices are, they are able to advocate for the different industry participants, both to the legislative branch as well as the executive branch. I think it's really important to know that you have access as a member, that you have access to the association and optimize that. I think many times we pay our subscription fee to the associations, and then we just wait to see what we'll get out of it. Let's be proactive. Let's get more engaged with AAFA and see how we get more out of the organization, because the organization is working hard to do right by the industry, and let's, I think optimizing the benefits there would be good. I think it's clear that ignorance is not it's not a valid excuse. Ignorance of the law is almost impossible to claim, given so much information being out, both from the associations and the media and the agencies, the regulatory agencies publishing a lot of information. I think it's important to be proactive in auditing your compliance programs, understanding that customs is coordinating enforcement actions across multiple areas, whether it's across different agencies, in U.S. government agencies, or even different jurisdictions. There is a lot more communication and coordination. So if you are a company that's focused on compliance, make sure that you're actually focusing on all complete compliance. I think there's a lot more that I can talk about this, but I think some of the areas that it's almost like a return to basics. Go back to figuring out what is the actual country of origin of your goods, what is the accurate reporting of that, and if the government is going to look at your transactions for validating the country of origin, they're certainly not going to turn a blind eye to classification. They're not going to turn a blind eye to valuation. So while they're there, they'll be happy to look at all of that for your transactions. So, do a holistic view of what your declarations are and ensure that you can comply. One piece that I think is super important is record keeping. I think that's going to be a big gap and a big liability for many importers and even customs brokers. So now's the time. We'll whisper, hoping that the government doesn't know that I'm telling you that this is an area that you need to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row, because it can be a big gap for a lot of people.
Yeah, wonderful. And look, lots happening, and certainly a lot happening within Oritain as well. So to give a little bit of colour around some of the things that we care about, certainly we are seeing an increase in the need for verified suppliers. It's an area that is not going away. It's a critical part of ensuring supply chain transparency. And it's also a core part of why we've moved in the direction of the membership model. So a number of the things that you've talked about today, Anna, really touch on what we feel is the critical direction that we're taking some of our product offering. What that really means for us is that, we launched membership in November last year. Hopefully many of you on this call have seen this. What that is, it's around connecting buyers and suppliers. So brands, manufacturers, retailers, suppliers, really building that ecosystem really in a trusted way to make sure that we are all committed to the bigger picture around supply chain transparency. What that practically means for us is that verified suppliers and manufacturers now get access to a platform that they can share their results and really show that they are responsible actors. This actually gives them market access. So it enables them to get in front of brands and retailers that are looking for responsible suppliers and manufacturers. And it really helps to start that conversation around what does that look like? Brands are really excited about this as well, because now through Oritain, they get visibility into good actors. They can see which suppliers, which manufacturers are already on that traceability journey. They're not starting from scratch every time they do a supplier review. They're really starting to see the full network effect. So we're really excited about what membership is going to bring for us, and also what we think it brings for the industry. What that means for us is 3 tiers. So we've got the gold, silver, and bronze tier. Really, that's about making sure that we have enough built into our membership to help people on their journey where they are today. People might move up from bronze to gold. It really denotes a level of rigor that goes into that testing and a series of benefits that wrap around it. And we're already starting to see a lot of interest in that space. We have a number of leading manufacturers who have already joined our membership program: Ramatex, Wellspun, Eunice, just to name a few, and a lot of really interested brands as well, as we start to really build that wider network. We've also moved into leather and timber, as Anna mentioned. You'll hear more about that if if you're attending the summit next week. We're really excited about taking what we've learned in cotton and moving that into new verticals, into new sectors, making sure that transparency really is across a number of different areas. So something to keep an eye on. And as Anna mentioned, regulators are looking at that in different markets. A few kind of final updates from us, and then we can open it for questions. We've also really heavily invested in our science and infrastructure. As you'd expect, that's a core part of our ability to continue to deliver forensic origin verification. We have acquired 3 laboratories across Europe: AIA, Imprint, and AgroIsolab. They complement our already existing network with our lab based in New Zealand. And just finally, we are now in Singapore. We have an office in Singapore to help expand our capabilities across APAC. So for those of you attending next week, really looking forward to speaking about this more. I promise Gemma will be back in full swing. She'll be having these conversations. Please do connect with her. And I will now hand it back to you, Audrey, and we will see what questions.
Before Audrey takes over, I do want to say, I know the Winter Olympics are on, and there have been some injuries in skiing. Gemma was not competing in the Winter Olympics.
She was
Please
not.
ask her about it though next week during the executive summit. Sorry, Audrey,
Well,
over to you.
Thank you so much to Oritain, Anna, and Sarah for that insightful discussion. Anna, truly a wealth of knowledge. I took some helpful notes on those great insights that you've shared, especially as we all navigate this ever-changing U.S. trade policy. But now it is time to hear from our audience. So your questions and perspectives are valuable to this discussion. So please share them through the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. We'll address as many questions as possible, and our speakers will follow up by email with any questions we don't get to today. So our first question, so we rely on our supplier's country of origin certificates. If those turn out to be wrong, are we liable under the False Claims Act?
One thing that I should mention is I am not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice on this webinar. I do think that it depends on what claims you're making. Certainly, the Customs Modernization Act of 1993 makes the U.S. importers responsible to ensure that they exercise reasonable care in the claims that they make to the U.S. government. As part of that, it depends on what kind of reasonable care the importer has taken with regards to properly validating the claims from your suppliers and the declarations that you put in place.
Thank you. Our next question. So once a company has mapped their supply chain, can they still face risks?
I think that the issue of mapping your supply chain is super important. It's I think when we started doing I think in textiles there's been a lot more scrutiny, as I mentioned earlier, and so I think the free trade agreement qualifications, et cetera, required a lot more supply chain transparency. So I think a lot of this industry is in a better place, but aside from getting some visibility on your supply chain, you have to trust but verify. So you can't just get a piece of paper or an email or a verbal declaration from your supplier. You need to take some steps to validate that the claims that are being made to you as the brand or as the importer are correct. And so that can take a number of different forms. Certainly, we at Oritain would say we would be happy to help you verify your origin claims using our forensic science. But there are other ways that you could make sure that you're taking proactive steps to validate those claims. The False Claims Act. I think that they're very case specific. And so I don't really want to answer, yes, you're liable, no, you're not liable without a more detailed conversation. And then again, I'm not a lawyer.
And on the question of verification, if someone has been working with the same supplier for over 20 years, do they really need to verify them, or is that time, long enough?
Well, I mean, it's not really about how long somebody's been working with the supplier. I think that having a long relationship with the suppliers should help in facilitating the efforts to verify the compliance. And it should be more of a partnership in ensuring that the manufacturer of the raw materials or the injects into the product is going hand in hand with the importer to ensure that that supplier's claims are accurate, and that's going to limit the liability on the importer that's going to be bringing those goods into the United States or into another market that may have some regulatory compliance laws in place. So I think there are many laws that have changed over the years. If we talk about UFLPA, for example, where many companies who are doing business with people who are currently, or companies that are currently listed on the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force entity list. So you may have been doing business with a particular supplier for 20 or 30 years, but now that they are actually on the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force entities list, they are now a prohibited source. And so continuing to do business with that supplier can be very risky, especially as it relates to goods that would be entered into the US market. So it's not really how long you've been doing business with the company. How that can help you is in the strength of the relationship, in joining together to ensure that both companies are doing the best that they can to be compliant in their respective markets.
Roger, I'll just add to that. That's actually not an uncommon situation that we see with an Oritain. We are actually finding a lot of our customers are not just concerned with compliance. They actually want to be able to have confidence from a brand perspective and speak really confidently and with authority that they know what is in their supply chain. That just comes through another level of rigor, through really understanding source. So it may not mean that there's anything that has changed within a particular supplier, but it does add another level of rigor and confidence to those conversations that brands want to have with consumers and suppliers and manufacturers now want to have with those brands and retailers.
Thank you. Thank you both for those insights. And if a company has been so lucky that they have not received any enforcement actions from CBP yet, what do you think would potentially trigger, one of those audit requests, the CF 28s and 29s you were talking about earlier, that would have a company, pop up on CBP's radar for those type of audits?
Well, I do think it's important to note that CBP does have a portal where civil society, non-governmental organizations, citizens can submit allegations of forced labor or allegations of any kind of fraud, negligence, or gross negligence. And those new insights from whether it's competitors, disgruntled employees, or just simply concerned citizens, or like I said before, civil society organizations who have conducted investigations in those foreign countries, they can raise concerns, and then those concerns would not be ignored by the US government. The government would take in that information and conduct its own investigation. And part of that, in order to determine whether or not there are any implications on US importers, any company could potentially find that the US government's going to ask some questions, and depending on the answers that they receive from those responses, either validate that the company is compliant or dig a little deeper and see what's going on.
If overseas supplier does not want to disclose their second and third tier raw material suppliers for us to map out the supply chain for our due diligence, what's the best approach that you suggest for next steps if they want to move forward with that supplier?
Well, I think many suppliers, I know that companies in the US are clear that it's not as easy to just compel companies to give you information. I think a lot of the concerns between one tier of the supply chain and another is obviously not losing out on their business. And so there are opportunities. There's different ways of being able to get the information that you need without jeopardizing that other companies' business confidential information, so the value of their transactions, who all is involved with that. It's communication, understanding what your client supplier relationship is and why you need certain information. In some cases, I know that when I was with the government, we received information directly from the supplier in relation to a particular importer, but without disclosing the information directly to the importer because they wanted to protect their business confidential information. There's a number of different ways of being able to ensure that you get that transparency without violating that business confidential information. I hope that was clear. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and look, I'll just add to that. I think one of the things that we hope with membership is that some of those challenges will start to go away. Our intention is to try and build a trusted network where visibility is the standard, not the exception. So over time, those conversations are difficult today. Everybody's on a journey, but we really do hope that, that isn't a concern for us in the future. Here's hoping.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing that's interesting as I've had a chance to now sit in on a couple of the discussions with vendors on why they should have their own program with Oritain versus just the importer that they're selling to. I think many vendors didn't really realize that it would be beneficial for them and their credibility and their reach to some of their other clients to be able to demonstrate that they do have a program to test their own products that they're offering, and that they do have a concept of evaluating the risk for any prohibited materials in the goods that they're selling, and having those that testing component to their manufacturing process is something that benefits across the board to their clients, not just the one that was directing them to do the testing in the past.
Thank you. Can you share any trends of CBP enforcement and UFLPA, any industries that were kind of a focus last year, and maybe any predictions you have for this year of where CBP is going to focus that enforcement?
Well, I certainly don't speak for the government anymore, even though I have nostalgia and spent my whole adult life there. I wish I could, but I don't speak for them. But just based on what I see from the outside looking in, and the clients that I've had the privilege of representing, I think that there's a lot of concern with regards to transshipment and claims of free trade agreement qualifications, because most of these free trade agreements give exemptions to other types of duties. It makes it a little bit more attractive, a little bit more of a win to get away with if you don't accurately declare the origin. I think that we'll see continued interest in cotton. Cotton is, especially as we start seeing provisions, for example, with the Bangladesh free trade agreement with the U.S., where those provisions come into play, where you won't have to pay duty on goods that contain the U.S. cotton once those provisions are finally worked out. I think it'll be important for the U.S. government to trust but verify that the claims that are being made are accurate, that those that are taking advantage of the benefits of not having to pay duties because they're using U.S. cotton, that in fact those goods actually do contain U.S. cotton, and that they're not cheating on where they claim the origin of that cotton is. And so that will continue. Cotton is such an important commodity around the world that it's going to be very important to continue to keep that. And ensure that all aspects of trading cotton are compliant. Certainly, areas of concern with regards to polysilicon, solar panels, those will continue to be an issue. But when you think about deforestation, when you think about how much building materials we use from around the world, I think timber is going to be another key commodity, and we're going to see a lot more scrutiny on timber, not just from a Lacey Act perspective for endangered species of wood, but actually for false claims of origin and where that wood is coming from. I know that recently CBP issued some interim measures on some cabinets made of wood because the cabinets were misrepresented or were evading anti-dumping and countervailing duties. I think we'll see more and more CBP is taking proactive measures to take enforcement on those that are not properly paying anti-dumping and countervailing duties through the EPA provisions. So yeah, I think those are going to be some areas that we'll see a lot more interest in. I think the fact that there is no more de minimis and more goods are having to be declared using the regular traditional entry type 01 will have more access for the government of more details and data of what's coming in. And again, more opportunities for reviewing classification, valuation, and country of origin.
Thank you so much. And we've had some excellent questions today, and I want to thank everyone for their thoughtful participation. Before we close, I'd like to highlight several exciting upcoming events in AFA's calendar. We're very excited to see Oritain represented next week at our Executive Summit. Thank you so much, Sarah, for highlighting this earlier as well. This event will be hosted at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, D.C. from March 4th through 6th. In other news, we have early bird registration for the Global Supply Chain and Trade Conference. This will take place on April 14th and 15th in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Traceability and Sustainability Conference will take place in Denver, Colorado from July 8th through July 9th. I want to extend our sincere appreciation to Anna and Sarah for sharing their valuable insights today, and special thank you to Oritain for making this session possible, and to each of our audience members for your active participation and engagement. You'll receive an email within 1 to 3 business days with a link to the session recording. We look forward to seeing you at our next event and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.